welcome on Episteme Entrepreneur, the web media dedicated to science, technology, and deep tech innovation. And today with my friend, Dr. Benjamin Delsol, quantum physicist, European patent attorney, and deep tech innovation strategist, we have a great guest. His name is Amir Feizpour. He's a PhD in quantum physics from the University of Toronto. He's a former quantum physicist, scholar. He who turned data scientist, expert in natural language processing, artificial intelligence, and now he is the founder of Aggregate Intellect. There is an amazing startup. You will have plenty of time to explain what it is. Hi Amir, how are you? Thanks for being our guest.
Of course, thanks for having me.
It was a
It's a
great pleasure
pleasure.
and honor.
Yes.
Hi Vanj, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks. It's a pleasure
Fantastic.
to have Amir today.
So, I made a thumbnail to present this live with you as a kind of guru of artificial intelligence, but it's true. You're the leader of a community of AI expert, and by AI expert I mean top level people. PhD, top level engineer. You have 4,050 people who are connected to you, and this is very great, to have you, because you are the man to know in the artificial intelligence. So once again, we are very happy to have you. But before we dig into your company, your startups, and what you do, we would like to know you a little bit better. Because most of the time, experts and scientists are viewed by people like kind of Mr. and Mrs. Spock. We are kind of impressive people, but you are human being with flesh and bones and emotions. So could you little bit talk about your path and where are you from? I asked the question naively, but I know where you're from.
Yeah, sounds good. So, yeah, to give you a bit of background, I guess I am originally from Iran.
No, really? Wow.
I am actually from south of Iran, near a city called Shiraz, which is very similar to the famous wine. Um, so I grew up in a relatively small town, maybe about 100,000 people. My dad was and still is a vet, and my mom has been a housewife, but she's always been very, very entrepreneurial. She's always learning something new and bringing people together around that, art, around that craft that she learns and teaches everybody. She's like the source of knowledge for about craft stuff, within the extended family. And I have we are four kids in the family. All of us have gone through the PhD route and then moving into industry. I came in Canada I came to Canada in 2008 to start my PhD in quantum physics, as you said. And after that, I was here for 6 years, and after that, I went to England to work at University of Oxford for a couple of years. Didn't love England because it was very gray all the time. So I ended up coming back to the frozen land, and have been in Canada for the past, 6 years now.
Toronto, right?
In Toronto, that's right.
Great. So I just want to ask you about your master's degree at Sharif University, because we were talking about that with Benjamin, because I was telling him that each time I notice an Iranian, on LinkedIn, who has a top position in startup, in academia, or as an entrepreneur, most of these guys have a master's degree in electronics, in physics, in mathematics from Sharif University. It's like Sharif University produced the brain for the future United States, and how demanding is the program taught at Sharif University. Something we would like to understand, because the name Sharif is not known for most of people in Western, but I know how they are good, but can you maybe explain how it's still true? Is still Sharif University is still one of the best higher education in science in the Middle East?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a university of technology, so similar to, maybe if we do a very crude analogy, it's like the MIT of Iran, right? Like it's a university primarily focused on engineering and science, STEM kind of disciplines. Um, I went there only for my master's. I did my undergrad in a different university. So the setting was very different than the setting where people do undergrad there. Like that's like super competitive. Like if you are, so in Iran we have this university entrance exam, and everybody, several 100,000 people who participate every year are ranked according to their performance. And if you are anywhere within the first few hundred, you're definitely choosing Sharif University, unless there is a reason not to do that, right? So if you're in a technical field or a science field, most probably your first choice is Sharif University. And a lot of them are extremely smart people, like very, very talented. Obviously, I didn't make it in undergrad. I went there for my master's, but I interacted with a lot of students, with a lot of folks that did their undergrad there, and you could clearly see that they were a step above anybody else that I had interacted with. I had a similar experience when I went to Oxford, uh, and one thing that was really striking for me in both of these cases was that they're definitely like very, very smart students in all of these cases. But one thing that was very interesting for me was that they were not necessarily working significantly harder than other people. They were very, very smart about how they were working, how they were studying. They were very disciplined about it. And that's the thing that makes them really different. They're of course very hardworking, of course very smart, but the fact that they also have figured out how to work productively, I think makes a significant difference in their performance in undergrad, grad school, and then life in general.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And how do you see, the heritage of algorithm? The inventor of algorithm in the Persian uh, high school, studying math very early. Is it still something very present in the mind, or now it's just past history?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there are a lot of things that are wrong with that nation and that country, unfortunately. But education is an interesting one because both from government and from society, there's a lot of expectations around high quality education. My dad would have been happy if I didn't do anything with my life except studying and being like super successful from an educational point of view, and that's a sentiment of the whole society. And even like as I said, like government provides free public education in a lot of cases. In the past decade or so, there are a lot of alternatives, but the fact that free public education exists is a luxury. The fact that we study things fairly early on compared to what I've observed here in Western countries is quite interesting. Like we study like integrals and differentiation and PDEs and all of these things. I think much earlier than folks in the Western countries come across. So that still is there, and I think it really stems from the fact that you're either a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer or you're nothing.
Yeah.
That's a sentiment that it is a little probably softened recently, but that's a sentiment that exists there. You're one of these, or you have completely failed. And everything around education is built to set you up to be a successful person in one of these disciplines, or you end up being a mishap like me and end up in science. So
And what about yourself? Why did you choose to study math and physics? Because your father was a vet, so you could have been attracted by biology or by veterinary science or by medical science. And why specifically math and physics? What was it? did you choose this path because you were just good at math and but you choose the easiest way for you, or you have a target at high school? You saw yourself already as a, I don't know, as a scholar in mathematics or physics?
I would love to tell you that it is all intentional, but so I knew that I didn't really like, and I was damn wrong about humanities. Like I didn't like humanities when I was younger, so I
Me
didn't
too.
think that was a
Me
direction I
too.
wanted to go to. Later in life, I learned how much interesting stuff happens there,
Me
and
too.
yeah, I just needed to be older and wiser, I think, to realize that. But when I was young, and again, like because of the pressure in the society, you're either an engineer, a physician, lawyer, or nothing, right?
Mm.
That's very binary.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was significant societal pressure. So my choices were: do I want to be a physician or do I want to be an engineer? And almost all of my family ended up in medical areas. As I said, my dad is a vet, and all of my siblings ended up in bio and or medical or neuroscience related fields, except me, and I'm the oldest. So I didn't love those areas, and I felt like I really struggled with biology, for example, in high school. So I didn't feel, and even chemistry, that is a significant part of those disciplines. I didn't like it. So I was good at math and physics, as you said. But my target was engineering because, again, if you're not an engineer in those areas, then you're not doing it right. So, and that was my target when I was, studying for the entrance exam. My goal was, actually mechanical engineering. I was like, I want to be a mechanical engineer. I love, robots and cars and aircrafts and whatever, and I want to be able to build those. But when I did my entrance exam, my ranking was pretty decent, but wasn't good enough to do mechanical engineering in Shiraz University. That's where my family lived at the time, and I wasn't ready to move away from my family. So I ended up choosing physics, not because I was one of these kids that was like, oh my god, physics and whatever. It was just the next thing that I had in my ranking. So I ended up in physics, and ironically, to a large extent because of the societal pressure, because everybody in the extended family was like, oh my god, you could do you know petroleum engineering, you could do mechanical engineering, you can do aerospace in other cities. Why do you insist on staying here and doing this stupid thing called physics? And it really got into me at some point, and I went to our advisor and I said, look, I made a mistake, I regret it, I want to change to engineering. And she was like, great, so here's the paperwork, but here's what I have to tell you. If you want to be successful, you can be successful wherever you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter what your discipline is. Don't let the societal pressure to push you out of this, because I think you would be good at this. And it was probably to some extent my laziness. I didn't want to do the paperwork, but also it really impacted me in a very, very significant way. And I had like 2 or 3 of these kind of advices in my life that completely changed the path. But I decided to stay in physics, give it a go, and figured, I'll change when I do my master's. And as soon as I came across quantum physics, I was just completely in love with that. And I was like, and for my master's, my ranking was actually really good. So that's why I went to Sharif University. And I could have done almost any engineering discipline I wanted. It would have been harder, but at that point I was very good at studying and getting good grades and whatever. But I decided to stay in physics because nothing else had quantum, and I wanted to do quantum. So
Fantastic. I'm for joking. I'm used to say, um, if you can pass, there is the Turing test for the artificial intelligence, and for the quantum computing, you have the the quantum intrication test. If your brain doesn't explode when you understand the concept, it's okay. You can continue, because it's so crazy.
Mhm.
So then, okay, you moved to Toronto. You made your PhD, and then you fly to Oxford, great university. You perform your postdoc there with a lot of publication and patent also. Great. I take a look on Google Scholar. You're amazing guy. And then you have this boiling desire, to move to industry, and you work at several years as a NLP product lead for the Royal Bank of Canada. And
That's right.
what I would like to understand is how is the change, from the working in academia, which
Yeah.
it's unruled, and working for a corporation, and a big corporation, with that it has its own way of working, etc. How do you see the difference in terms of research and development between these two worlds?
Yeah. I mean, the summary of it is that I hated it. The corporate work and corporate culture part. But in academia, as you said, like I was working in probably one of the top three labs in my field, right? So I was surrounded by people who were at least as good as I was, like in terms of academic performance. Like a lot of people who had, several nature papers and patents and, very, very high performing research. Um, and I was at the top of my game, but I felt I had to work so hard to even be seen, because I didn't want to be a faculty member in a second tier university. I thought I wanted to be in a top tier university, but usually getting a job at a top tier university is very difficult, even if you're a super high performing academic, right? So, I sort of in the middle of my postdoc position there, I decided if I want to put this much effort, I will put that effort into building something that is more meaningful, financially or otherwise, right? So, and I wanted to get off of the academic hamster wheel. So that's what encouraged the move to industry. I was very worried about the work culture in industry. So I did a bunch of research, and I decided that startups were the way to go for me personally, because I had an expectation that I would not last long in a corporate culture, but life has constraints. So I didn't have much saving. I didn't have any business experience. I didn't know how to talk to business people. I still don't. But 7, 8 years ago, I was even worse than that. So I decided that it makes sense for me to work at a corporate to learn how to interact with business people, how to talk business, and also ramp up a bit of savings, so that if I decide to do a startup, I have enough financial backing to do that. Um, and yeah, I worked at a corporate. My thinking was I'll work here for 6 months. I save money, learn a few things, and move on and do something else. But I ended up staying there for 3 years, for variety of reasons. Probably laziness was part of it. Probably the golden handcuff of having decent salary without having to work too hard for it was part of it. But I was very, very bored. And from a technical skills point of view, um, I wasn't really using my full bandwidth at all. Like I wasn't even close to it. So I started doing a lot of things outside of work. Like essentially, at some point, I was given the opportunity to manage a team. Within the first year that I worked there, I just had come from academia. I was just thinking seriously about leaving, and then my manager was like, "Do you want to be a manager?" Um, and it was more salary, it was more control and power, so it was attractive. I figured, why not give it a try? But that meant that I couldn't code anymore or be hands-on on the technical side, and that was one of the other super interesting advices that I got in my life, that changed everything. And it was you know become a manager because your impact will be higher. You can build way more with a team, but make sure that you stay technical, because if you lose your technical edge, you become irrelevant.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, okay, but how? Like, I'm in meetings all day. And, the person that gave me the advice was just figure something to do outside of work that forces you to stay technical. And that's how I started the community. Like, that was like really the spark that literally that night I messaged a bunch of people and I was like, do you want to gather every week and read papers together? And, that was, the first 10 people that showed up, and then they become 20, 40, 80. It just grew. In a few months. We were hundreds of people. Everybody was bringing in their friends to talk about papers. And that was the beginning of our community, like literally that advice and my selfish attempt at trying to be stay technical, although I was moving into a management role.
I love how you explained, the emerging moment of your crazy community. Once again, I remind 4,050 experts, the best expert in artificial intelligence in your community. Very dynamic. You organize every month, every week, many workshops, seminar. It's crazy, and how it's emerged. The story of how it's emerged is just great. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks.
Of course.
Uh, and so you could after, okay, maybe the Royal Bank of Canada was not so exciting, but you could, with your background, with your expertise, etc., you could have ended in GAFAM, working with a $1 million salary every year, but what happened in your mind is to say, okay, now I want to launch a startup?
Craziness.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Content
um,
integration, it's something happens in there.
yeah, I know. It's a physiological defect, I think. No, joking aside, if you remember, I said, my when I was transitioning from academia to industry, I was concerned about it. I was, worried that although academia wasn't the right place for me to stay, I was worried that maybe industry is not the right place either. So, I wanted to have a better understanding of what I was getting into because that was a major change. And I talked to a lot of people, and from people who had done similar transitions, I heard that exactly what I experienced at my corporate job was what they were experiencing. So I knew what I was getting into, and I knew that that wasn't the place that I wanted to stay. I knew that I wanted to work in a startup. I knew that I wanted to be on the ground floor. What I didn't know was if I necessarily wanted to start my own or join another one. But but I was also very, very opinionated. Sometimes when I talk to people, like I have in the community that you mentioned, we also have a founders sub community, a few hundred people that are founders in Toronto that we meet every week and go for a walk and whatever. One of the things that um, I usually talk to them about is the fact that you got to be obsessed about a problem. Like you have to stay awake at night thinking about a problem. Otherwise, you should not do a startup about it, right? Like it's a hard journey, so you have to. It has to be something that is personal, right? And the thing that was personal for me was the fascination with the ability to use AI on text to extract information and insight and knowledge, right? So that was like absolutely fascinating. Like that's what I did in my corporate job mostly. For most of the use cases I worked on were similar to that. But what I really wanted to do was how can I use this to make science better? And that explains our domain, AI.science, because originally the idea was can we start building AI models that accelerate science?
Hmm.
Uh, so that's the problem statement I was fascinated with. And I looked around for startups that were doing that. There were a few, but they weren't really doing what I wanted to do. And because of the community, because of the momentum that was happening, I really felt, and it was a crazy, stupid decision, but I felt confident to just leave my corporate job and start this company and hope to figure it out along the way. And I'm happy that I made that decision and made that stupid choice of you know burning through all of my savings, etc., etc. Because the past 4 years that I've worked on this startup has been a remarkable journey in terms of, it's probably worth 10 MBAs in terms of how much I've learned about, how business works, how industry works, how product building works, and most importantly, understanding human behavior, and above all, understanding myself. I spent probably 3 years banging my head against the wall trying to figure out how to create a business, right? But it wasn't until the moment that I realized that this is a marathon and I need a lot of personal development, like in terms of my physical fitness, in terms of mental health, in terms of social health, in terms of many, many other factors that are things that nobody teaches you at a school. I have to be the master of all of these about myself before I can create a business that will be successful. And of course, there are anomalies, but it's been a remarkable journey in terms of how much I've learned. And the reason that I continue building communities and continue educating is that I want everybody to know that this is not only about a product, it is not only about a business. It's a significant transition that happens, and you just come out a completely different person, even if the business doesn't end up working.
Absolutely. We are used to say that entrepreneurship is a social adventure, and this is what you do. You bring a lot of people with you, interacting. Everybody, you facilitate interaction between them, and this is really great. So you launched in Aggregate Intellect. How many people are you, and what you do exactly? To whom do you address? What type of clients, and how do you do it? I mean, do you do it at home? Do you tape your algorithm yourself behind your screen, or do you out crowdsource? How do you work?
Um, that's a complicated question to answer. So my team has grown over the years, but in the past year or so, we have reduced the size of the team for reasons that I will explain in a minute. But right now, I have a development team that is overseas. So there are my full stack developers. I have a research team at McGill University. That's a few grad students that worked on a lot of our R&D initiatives. Um, and given that we have a community and we never wanted to monetize the community, what I really enjoy doing that I think is relatively different than other communities is not only we don't charge people to be part of our community, but we also create economic incentives for them to be part of the community. So to some extent, my team sometimes expands as several, a handful of people from the community working on our initiatives. If there is a project we are working on and there's a client that is paying for it, we just share the upside with the community and do it together. So my that's why I said it's a complex question to answer how many people are in the team, because it's very, very elastic. The community is an extension of my team, and it grows and redacts based on whatever is necessary to happen in terms of our business initiatives. So that's the team size. In terms of what we are doing, as I said, my very, very early idea was how can we use AI to advance science. So the audience of that would have been academics, but very quickly we learned that academics don't pay for anything. So although we were stuck with the domain, I really liked it, so we kept it. But we pivoted towards an education model. So we sort of changed our idea and said, what if we used AI to curate research as it is to be used by industry practitioners? Like if you're a machine learning engineer in industry, you have to read a lot of scientific papers. What if we used AI to make that process easier? At least tell you which papers to look at, right? So that's what we did for a while. We did a lot of manual curation of content, and helped people create stuff, right? But even like we launched a subscription model. We ramped up to a few $1,000s recurring revenue per month, etc. But I shut it down because I didn't love the people that it was attracting. So it was attracting a lot of certificate holders, is what I call them, and a lot of people who came and did our content and then immediately asked for certificates. And I was like, I don't believe in certificates, so no. So what we ended up doing actually was to tell them, since we also had launched a YouTube channel and it was pretty successful at the time, I told them, use our content, create a small MVP, a little product with what you learn, create a demo from it, and we put that demo on our YouTube channel, and that's your certificate, right? So in 3 cases, we got approached by buyers who wanted to purchase those projects. And in 1 case, we ended up selling the project for $20,000 and split the money with the team.
Wow.
And I didn't love the edtech angle, but I was like, oh my God, like we can make money from this. So we switched the model completely to a marketplace model. The idea being, can we go to companies and say, what are interesting R&D projects? Can we post it to our community? And if they build something that you want to acquire their IP, we take a cut. And that was a very interesting model. We worked with several startups. We worked with the government of Canada on a bunch of environmental data science initiatives. But ultimately, we realized that it was very hard to scale that marketplace, like all marketplace business models are. So we decided to focus more specifically on the software we were building. And the idea of the software was still, there's technical content. Can we use AI on it to make it more accessible, easier to consume, more targeted, etc.? So we started building, what we later learned that it was really a knowledge management tool. So the idea would be to connect to all of the knowledge sources and help you navigate to the content that was relevant to the use case, the business use case you were doing. So we did that for a while until ChatGPT came out, and it completely disrupted how we were working. My team was working on large language models, the research team, but we didn't have it as part of our product. So since the beginning of this year, we sort of were forced to pivot into future because we were planning to start working on these things a year from now, but then we had the opportunity to do it right away and the pressure from the market to work on those right away. So we sort of pivoted our product completely. Sorry, go on.
No, I have sorry for that. I have a very dumb question from someone who is not, a physicist or mathematician, or someone who was watching your work from an outside view. I see also, like everyone, the emergence of OpenAI and ChatGPT, and is it really so mysterious, how they work, their algorithm, or is it a way to retro-engineer and to understand how their algorithm works? Of course, not to use it because it's their proprietary, but but it's like, they have this kind of a mysterious bubble coming from an alien world, and all the eye scene has been shocked, by their emergence. Can you talk about a little bit this happening in the tech field?
So the algorithm behind GPT, the transformer architectures have been around since 2015. So that part is not, completely new and or surprising. And there has been, gradual progress from, the invent of them to more advanced architectures that we have today. We even know pretty accurately the architecture of versions of GPT that came before ChatGPT, because most of these have been open source. So the community has access to exactly the architecture, data sets used, et cetera, for most of the cases, most of the models that we've used. But since the back end of ChatGPT, like the change was gradual enough that we have a very good guess about what the back end of ChatGPT is, but we don't know exactly because they didn't open source that. What they did was to provide it as an API that anybody can call, but they didn't say exactly, what they changed compared to the last model. Again, because of the gradual change that has been happening since 2015, there's a very good guess about what it is, and open source community has tried to reproduce the same performance with a lot of success actually. Like they're not. I don't think we have any model that is as good, but models that get very very close.
It's
So
fascinating.
we do have a very good idea what it is and what it does. But the remarkable, and even like the model that is behind ChatGPT was available to a large extent through API calls throughout the past year before ChatGPT came out. But the thing that made a huge splash was essentially a product choice. Like OpenAI decided that the performance of the model was good enough that they wanted to make it available to every person through a chat interface. And that's a very interesting product choice because from a model performance point of view, it was available even 6 months before ChatGPT came out. It didn't make the news, but as soon as it was launched as an application that anybody can interact with, then it made a huge difference. So, uh, to summarize, an answer to your question, we have a very good understanding of what is happening in those models, but since they close source the recent models, we can only guess and infer. We don't unfortunately know exactly. For example, in GPT-4, we have very good guesses about the combination of models they're using, but we don't know exactly what they are because they haven't told us.
Fascinating. And so you, sorry, I caught you when you were explaining that there were a ChatGPT boom, and you are moving to a new model, right?
That's right. So essentially, that was a good segue because the reason that we had to pivot was not because we were surprised. It was because that product choice was made by OpenAI team in terms of launching the model as a chat app, and that immediately changed the expectation of our end users. Because up to that point, they were happy with whatever user experience we were providing, but all of a sudden, we almost felt it over a week that people were like, "Why can I not talk to the system?" Right? I just want to type my question and have it answered. Like, why do I have to go through all of these backflips? So that's the reason. Like, the user experience expectation was the reason that we had to pivot. We were aware of the models, we were playing around with them, but the fact that we had to immediately start incorporating those into the product was really just forced upon us by that product choice that OpenAI made. You know, so which is quite interesting. Like that creates a whole new world of opportunities as well. It created that challenge, but also gave us access to models that we were planning to build in the next 2 years, right? But all of a sudden, we had access to them. So we started thinking, okay, what we were building is not going to be plausible anymore. So what should we build? And we had some ideas. And up to that point, as I said, our focus was very heavily on machine learning engineers. So we had to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, the facts are we have access to these models that we were planning to build now through APIs. People want to talk to the system and they want to do, an easier user experience. But we need to make money right now. So how can we make money? And through a bunch of experiments that we ran, we ended up deciding that we should pivot away from engineers and target salespeople. And that's a long conversation that we can get into. But essentially, the fundamental idea was instead of selling to machine learning engineers, why not sell to sales engineers? Because they still have to write a lot of complex technical documents that requires proper curation of content and knowledge. But their requirements are not the same as machine learning engineers, and also sales departments control the money of the whole organization. So if we can get them excited about what we're building, get them to pay, that's a pathway to go to the whole enterprise eventually. But also a much better starting point for us. So in the past several months, we've been very focused on, okay, how can we pivot our product to be used by salespeople to, for example, generate technical proposals, white papers, case studies, so that a task that takes them several days to do can be done in half an hour with our system that just scrapes information from everywhere, brings it together, writes the document, then you collaborate with the AI to modify the document, etc. But in the meantime, we also have been getting a lot of requests and inbounds from businesses who are trying to figure out what does generative AI mean for my business. So we've been also doing, a bunch of service work, essentially anywhere as high touch as high level engagement, like coaching them to figure out how to do things, to training them, all the way to co-development, or even like incubating products inside their businesses. So we are doing a range of things there, but it pays the bills and helps us understand the market better for our
Absolutely.
eventual product launch.
Just
Fantastic. Go ahead, please.
yeah, I have two questions, an old one and a new one. I will start with the new one. Did you thought about, or did you think about patent drafting? Because you're talking about technical content creation. So of
Yeah.
course, my mind go directly to drafting a patent application. So did you have you thought about that?
Yes, a lot. So when we were thinking about what use case can we go after that makes money, we put two constraints on the use case. One was, is it something that needs to happen every day and or every week? And is it something that is very closely related to making money? So we wanted the use case we focus on to have these two constraints. So patents are great. It's a very painful process, but you're probably writing patents once a year per team, right?
Yeah.
So you might be a huge organization that writes like hundreds of patents a year, but per team, that's not more than a couple per year. So, and
Yeah.
also it is not very directly related to revenue. So it is harder to put a price point on it.
Yeah, I see your point, but I was thinking more about IP firms as clients because, for
I see.
example, I write around one patent per week.
Mhm.
So believe me, it's and I'm
Yeah,
alone.
yeah,
So when you deal with an IP firm with 50 patent attorneys, it makes a lot of patent
yeah,
application drift every day.
yeah,
So it could be something. I'm telling you that because I have tried to develop myself some AI tools. So some works, some I'm still working on it to help me draft patent application. Of
yeah,
course, there is already some different companies that provide this kind of services, but that could be something interesting. I think from a business use case point of view, I think it could be something interesting. Not
yeah,
working with industries, but working with IP law firms
yeah,
directly.
yeah.
No, but we can talk about that later. But yes, no, I think we missed something about your amazing journey. It's okay. You have a PhD in quantum physics, and now you are doing AI stuff. So I think the audience would like to know how you go from quantum physics to AI.
Yeah.
Please.
Um, I'll say a couple of things. So I've been answering that question probably once a week since I left academia.
Yeah, I know. I have the same about IP and quantum physics, so don't worry.
So at some point, I wrote an article about everything that happened during that journey, and I encourage anybody who's listening and is curious to just read that. It is on my LinkedIn. There's a lot of detail, but the summary of it is that as a physicist, as an experimental physicist, I was good at obviously problem solving. I was good at math. I was good at the stats. I was good at dealing with data. And data science is just all of those things just applied to a different data set. So to a large extent, what I needed to do was to learn the vocabulary of how people talk about these things in industry setting. I had the technical skills, but I needed to learn the vocabulary, and of course, I needed to formalize my ability to code a little more, because in academia you usually just write a spaghetti code. In industry, you have to write a slightly better code. My
Yes,
code was
yes.
still pretty spaghetti, but uh, and just more software engineering concepts become relevant, etc. Right? So those things were things that I needed to learn to do the transition. But I was coming from a fairly strong background from a technical point of view, I think. And that was thanks to the fact that I was an experimentalist. I think a lot of people who are theorists, it might be a little harder for them because they might not have as much experience working with data, so that might be something that they have to learn as well. But an important thing is that everybody's journey is specific to them and very unique to them. So one thing that was very, very helpful when I was doing the transition was a few people that gave me advice about how they did it, what it meant for them, how they felt afterwards, etc. So one thing that I started doing very, very early on, as soon as I started working in industry, was to essentially dedicate 20 minutes a day to just talk to people about how that transition can happen for them. So, people have been booking me almost every day, for the past several years, just telling me, this is what I'm trying to do. I read your article, but I still have these, 10 questions. Like, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with that? And I don't have the answers, but, I can brainstorm with them. I can give them pointers. I can provide the, hiring manager point of view. So I think, if anybody is going through that transition, reaching out to people who have done it, obviously there's a lot of content you can read, but like talking through how others have done it and how that can be done for you is a super valuable resource. I proactively have a link on my LinkedIn called Coffee Chats that people use to book me, but most people don't. But nobody prevents you from sending them a request and saying, can I pick your brain about this thing because I noticed you did this transition. I'm exactly where you were. Can I take 10 minutes of your time, right? And most people might not respond, but even if 5 people a week respond to you and you can talk to them, that's going to create the recipe for a successful transition.
Yes, yes, wonderful. I really love also the part of about personal development on your journey, because it's indeed a very, very, I mean, it's the first step. You can do nothing if you don't work on yourself first. So
Yes.
I'm really happy to hear that, because a lot of startups do it, but never talk about it. It's like personal stuff. It's I don't want to talk about it, and but at the end, when you are successful, it's because you have worked on yourself.
Definitely.
So congratulations, yeah.
Thank you. The very, very beginning of this journey was um, a few years ago. When I was early in my startup journey, I was like super stressed out, and it was affecting my health. It was affecting my relationships. And for my birthday, my girlfriend gave me a book called Keeping Your Shit Together as an Entrepreneur. That's like literally the title of the book. And I think it was passive aggressive. She says that she just wanted to help me. But that was a fantastic book. Like, it really changed how I thought about entrepreneurship. Like, before that, I was like, entrepreneurship is all about go, 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 go. But in reality, it's a marathon. You have to balance
Yes,
everything. Otherwise, you cannot sustain it 100%.
yeah, great.
I have a question because as you were an experimental physicist, so being there is always this split between the theoretical physicist and the experimental physicist, and I'm a biologist, so we have only experimental biologists. There is no theoretical biologists. We kill them. So experimental scientist means that you perform experiment based on the scientific methods. So I won't explain what it is, but we have control, we have etc. Positive experiment, etc. We compare, uh, and we are used to say that launching a startup needs the skills of the experimental scientist, to perform experiment, very rigorous experiment. Did you also implement this behavior, this knowledge, the skills of performing experiment? Even for testing your business idea, your business, you have an idea, maybe this target for us is good. Do you jump on the idea and you test it, or you do very formal experiments,
Yeah.
to test the business idea?
Yeah. I mean, well, the short answer is yes. Like when I was leaving academia, one of the things that I wanted to have, in regardless of what I end up doing, was to have that scientific and experimental point of view to whatever I do. And I should, clarify one thing. Like when I say theorists, it doesn't mean that they don't run experiments. They just don't run experiments with devices, right? Like they do a lot of, simulation experiments, for example, as theorists. Um, but the overall process is the same in all cases. Like there is a hypothesis, there are assumptions you're making, there is a validation plan, there is a measurement, there's observations, and you repeat, right? So that process exists if you're a theorist or experimentalist, at least in physics. And I wanted that to exist in wherever I work. So I thought, data science has science in the name, so it must be that. And it was to some extent that, but it wasn't really what I wanted. So after data science, I worked in product development that had that aspect of experimentation much more, in my opinion. So I really enjoyed being a product person, and I still identify as a product person. I think more than a data scientist, really. And that's to a large extent because of that reason, that it has a significant amount of experimentation. Like you have to experiment everything, like your assumptions about the audience, about the feasibility of the technology, about the viability. You cannot leave anything unchecked. You cannot just make assumptions and hope for the best, right? So, and then entrepreneurship amplifies that by a factor of 10, because then you're not just building a product that if it fails, whatever corporate is going to give me another product to work on. If it fails, it failed. So you have to be, very careful and methodical about a lot of the details. So in the past few years, we've been more or less rigorous about how we think about experiment design and measurements and things like that. But it is part of our habit to always think about, what are our hypotheses, what are our assumptions, what's a validation plan that is cheap, and less risky, and how can we identify the most risky assumptions about what we are doing and try to focus on essentially invalidating those first. So it's definitely been a significant part of what we do, and I don't think any startup would work without that unless they get extremely lucky.
Absolutely, I'm totally convinced by that. Implementing the scientific method, the scientific experimental method is very important for startups to test business ideas, business assumptions. So this is very great. So we are reaching the end of this great interview. And what is the future of Aggregate Intellect? Will you knock at the door of investors, or do you want? What is your philosophy? 100% bootstrap? Are you fund seeking to raise funds? What is your future?
Yeah, definitely. So, I like to think that we are a deep tech company. That I say I'd like to think that because I don't think there is a very clear definition of what that means. But I'd like to continue researching at the cutting edge of large language models and just AI technologies in general. So, and for a company like that, you definitely need capital
Yeah.
that usually would come from VCs, right? So we have raised some money in the past, but we are mostly bootstrapped. Um, I would like to raise money at some point. I don't think right now is the right market for us to raise money because investors are still formalizing their thesis around generative AI and large language models. Like the majority of investors I've talked to recently, they don't even know what it means, let alone having a thesis. So they probably need a little more time to formulate their thoughts about it. And at the same time, we are getting a lot of inbounds for companies who are trying to incorporate these things in their businesses. So, we have the revenue opportunity, although it is, more service based. So the vision for the next year or so is continue doing service work because we are establishing business relationships. We are refining our sales pipeline. We are learning more deeply about industry needs, business needs, especially in this new area of sales focused teams rather than engineering that we were focused on before. But we are not dropping the product side. Like we are still working very heavily on the product development. Part of our product is open source, so the community is contributing to it. but part of it is, behind the private walls of our repos, obviously. So we are continuing to build that, and the vision is that within the next year, most probably, 6 months from now, say early 2024, we want to start reaching out to VCs and hopefully raise a seed round. As I said, I have made my team very lean, but instead of having more people in the team, I'm working on a few very very interesting strategic partnerships. I'm not ready to share a lot of details about them, but they're extremely exciting partnerships that we're forming on the business side that hopefully will enable us to do significantly more complex projects than what I would have been able to do on my own. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm excited to make the announcement, when the details are finalized. But our vision is either like that's still to be determined, but either to launch a SaaS product somewhere in the next half a year, or make a decision towards creating a studio VC, so somewhere that we can start incubating products using our own platform and a community.
It's funny
So
because I was asking you the question. Did you think about becoming a startup studio, and you answered it. Very 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 fascinating. Yeah.
yes, yeah, I'm extremely fascinated by what our community can do.
Mm.
And as you said, it's a very very high caliber community. Like I never pushed to grow the community beyond my ability to control the quality of what goes on in it. So I'm very happy with people that are in the community, the engagement they have, and what they can do. Like, we've had sub communities who've built, products and services and sold them, right? Like I gave one example, but there are multiple examples like that. So the idea of the incubation is very, very interesting for me. And, the partnership that I talked about might actually enable us to explore that more seriously. I don't think I can do that on my own. I don't have enough social capital on the business side to be able to pull that off. But I'm hoping that through some partnerships that might be possible. But I don't want to do a traditional studio VC that is very focused on relationships and go to market playbooks, etc. I want to build a studio VC, if you decide to go in that direction, that is data driven and based on a very very strong knowledge management platform, right? So a lot of balls in the air. We'll see where they land, but I'm very excited about the months that are coming up.
Yes, it's very exciting, and we will follow you closely to see the
Yes.
development. Benjamin, maybe you have a last question for our dear Amir.
No, I have a lot of things to talk with him after, but no. Right now it's perfect. I love your journey. I love your mindset, and I think you are a perfect example for several things. Everybody has its own journey, but there is some checkpoints that we have to go, and I think you are a perfect example. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. It was such a pleasure to have you today, and thank you again for sharing your story and your passion with all of us. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It's always exciting to talk about what has happened and what's coming up. And I hope your audience has enjoyed.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you very much. Take
Cheers.
care. Bye bye. See you soon.